Relationships. Most of us have all been in some form of relationship, whether it be an intimate relationship, a friendship, a family relationship. Like, we all have relationships. Um, and I think I would be doing it an injustice if I only talked about one type of relationship. I think that obviously the dominating relationship is who we choose as partners, right? We all choose partners in life. But ultimately, even the relationships outside of our partners influence the relationships with our partners. No matter what relationship we're in, they affect our lives deeply. So it's very important to be grounded in positive relationships, no matter what the relationship is. And I think that we view our intimate relationships as our most dominating relationships in our lives, and they should be. Why? Because who we choose as our partner in life, our twin flame, our soulmate, that is the relationship that affects our life the most. And it will affect our relationships as a ripple effect, right? And the more healthy and positive the intimate relationships in our lives with the people we choose as our partners are, the more positive of relationships we can have with others. I haven't been in a lot of relationships myself. I've been in two intimate relationships. If you watch a lot of my old Monday Coffee with the Dolls, my early Monday Coffee with the Dolls, they will be vastly different than the Monday Coffees that you see now. So if you haven't been with me from the very beginning, you most certainly would be shocked. You'd be shocked at what you would see. I come from a family who, you don't date until you're 16, and everything is very vastly influenced by religion and control and guilt trips, and making sure that you are living up to this standard that the hierarchies of the family have set. And there's people in my family that I don't think meant to use those in negative ways, that it was just out of love and trying to make sure that the kids of the family were happy and safe and secure. And then I think that there's people who used it in ways of manipulation and things of not the most positive things. And relationships with your family members will affect your relationships intimately later. You know what I mean? And I didn't realize that until I was divorced from, my first husband, and leaving my family. I don't really talk about that situation a lot because it's something I'm still navigating. And until I can speak on it completely healed, it's hard to speak on it without feeling like I might have some type of bitterness behind what I'm saying. So I try to be careful with what I choose to share and not share just yet, because until I feel whole, I don't think I have any space to speak on it in certain ways. But I also think that I to speak my truth and to share the experiences that I've had to possibly help others navigating the journey that they're walking through, I think is also important. So I try to use what I've gone through as a tool to try and help others maybe have a smoother journey, right? So it's very obvious to me now that I've left those relationships behind, how those relationships mimicked each other, and how I got myself into an intimate relationship because it was comfortable. I didn't realize that at the time because I was such a naive, inexperienced person. I was homeschooled in a very controlled environment. I didn't date. I didn't go to high school. I didn't have friends. I didn't have a lot of outward influences. So everything that I experienced was very unlearned and new to me. I didn't know how to read people. I didn't know how to stand up for myself. I didn't know what standards I should have. I didn't really have, I was going into everything so blind, that the only things that I saw that made me comfortable were things from my family relationships. But unfortunately, those things that I found that attracted me were not positives. And I think that a lot of times we seek out relationships that are comfortable for us out of out of you know being able to progress in those things, because we feel like if we're at least progressing in those things and we're making these relationships and we're getting into these relationships, we're at least doing something right. And I think that there's so much pressure on people that to have to be in relationships versus having a relationship within themselves. Now, having relationships is really important for just the human nature. We're supposed to have a tribe. We're supposed to have a team. We're supposed to have a counterbalance in a significant other. So those are things that we all seek out and we all crave. But I feel like through society, it's becoming more and more difficult to find those in healthy ways because everybody is just so off keel and they're all growing in such toxic environments and they're just bouncing from one bad environment to the next, trying to supplement, but ultimately just getting drawn back into the same bad scenarios that they left. You can't grow healthy in a garden with dry soil. You can't grow healthy in a pot that there's a bottom to, right? That like you can only grow so far and then you become root bound. So relationships, I feel, for a lot of people are like relationships were for me. I sought out somebody who reflected the environment that I was already in. I've always been a person who needed other people to direct them because that's how I was brought up, with being directed. Oh, M is the baby, she's the frail one, she's the shy one, the quiet one. People need to speak for her, people need to direct her, people need to be her backbone because she doesn't have one. And if you start out in an environment like that, as you grow, you're not going to grow a backbone because it's constantly being supplemented by people who say that they are your backbone. And if those people aren't in the most healthy minds themselves, you are just literally growing in a garden of fences over and over and over that you just keep hitting, and you want to grow bigger and bolder and more free, but you can't because you keep getting put back into this trellis that's like, no, you can grow straight up. You're the vine, here's your trellis, grow this way, this is the only way you can grow. If you try to grow outside of that, it's going to make us uncomfortable, we're not going to like it, and we're going to start snipping the vines that are reaching for more, you know what I mean? And so ultimately I got myself into an intimate relationship that reflected that. And this intimate relationship feasted and found so much validation in that control and manipulating my fears and my self-worth. And so I think that a lot of times as human beings, we find ourselves trapped in relationships that are toxic for us because we're not necessarily in relationships that are the best for us. We're in relationships that, maybe we are trying to change ourselves to fit into, or we're trying to change others to fit in with us. And I really am a believer of you have to be secure in who you are before you can find somebody that is your counterbalance. And my first relationship was all the bad things. And it was turmoil from the start. And it was, I was 17 when I had got with my first husband, and we were together for 8 years, and we got married, and we were married for a little while, like 3 years, I think, and I had both of my boys. And then I left that relationship when my oldest was 3 and my youngest was 3 months old. And I got to that point where I was like, oh, there's no more growing. Like I'm trying to water both of our soil and I'm trying to be this like teammate, but I can't because this person doesn't know how to be a teammate. And ultimately, I think it would be unfair for us to just be like, well, there's always an asshole in the relationship and somebody who's not. And I don't think that's the case. I think that there's so many people in this world that just are not capable because they were never given the environment to learn how to be capable. And I'm at a point in my life where I can reflect back and I'm not bitter because like I've grown through it and out of it. I'm done. I'm so detached from that dimension it doesn't affect me in that way anymore. There is no more pain. There is no more hurt or anguish. It's an experience that I went through and I had to go through and now I'm here. And sometimes we have to understand that relationships are meant for a season. They're not meant for eternity. And sometimes those relationships are meant to teach us something for a season and then we have to grow on by ourselves. And that goes for significant others and even family. Sometimes our relationships with our family are meant to be in our youth, but you can't have that same relationship as an adult. And that's kind of it for my family, right? So I didn't have a bad childhood. The childhood that I had and the adults that were raising me, you know, it got to the point where I outgrew the people who were helping me grow. And because of that, it challenged their own growth because they wanted to stay on the trellis. They wanted to keep just growing in that one direction on the trellis, and I didn't want to anymore. And when they're telling you no and they're trying to like use binding wire to wire you to this trellis and you're like, no homie, I don't want to be here anymore. And all of a sudden there's all this turmoil and fighting and they're trying to like salt the new ground that you're reaching to and they're trying to destroy the foundations that you're building. And these relationships can turn really toxic. And it can be hard sometimes to recognize when a relationship turns toxic and that you need to move on from it. And it can be really hurtful. But relationships are meant to help you grow, not keep you from growing. And I think that it's really difficult for people to grow in relationships anymore because nobody really even knows how to grow themselves, right? Everybody's like, I can't get enough water for my own roots to feel quenched. I definitely can't water this person's roots, but we're still trying. So I think that there's a lot of relationships that ultimately are just suffocating everybody's growth because they're not necessarily meant to be a twining vine together. But it's scary to not have a relationship. Everything around us tells us we need to be in relationships to ultimately have the best lives. And I don't think that's necessarily true. And I don't think that's always like true for everybody. I think that there's a lot of people out there that flourish on their own and flourish with different relationships in different ways. I'm a firm believer that everybody has multiple soulmates. My best friend Ashley was my first soulmate even before my husband. I believe my friend Ashley was my first soulmate ever, not my first husband. I was young and I was told I needed to start dating and I got myself into a relationship and I got stuck there. And because I grew up in an environment that told me that I needed to be controlled by others, and I got myself in a relationship with somebody who sought validation in controlling others. So it was like the perfect storm. I was the doormat, he was the muddy boots, right? And so that's just how it was. But then when I met my best friend Ashley, it opened my eyes up to a lot of things, and she very much was my first soulmate. And because of her, when I left that relationship, I was able to keep perspective until I met my intimate soulmate, my twin flame, my husband, who is my counterpoint, who is my all, my entire, like, my husband is me, I am him. And when you get into a relationship like that, it's really trippy to think about because all of a sudden, all of the bad relationship that you've been in seems crazy that you ever humored it, that you were ever a part of it, that you were ever in it. because it's this enlightenment of, how did I ever think that that was what a relationship was? And I think for a lot of people, until you get to what I have now with my husband, it can be really difficult. And I feel for those people because they're searching for that, but they keep getting trapped in these relationships that are sucking the life out of them. But until you find that, it can be hard to have that perspective. It can be hard to see that this is not where you need to be. So I'm not condemning anybody. It's really hard. And it's really hard when like you trust people and you think it's one thing and then ultimately that person lies or that person isn't who they said they were. And it can be really difficult. So I think that like in my middle phase, when I left that relationship, before me and my husband got together, I realized that there's no way in the world I would ever get myself back to that. Like I knew what I needed to stay away from, and I really kept that in mind. And even now when I'm interacting with people, I'm way more self-aware and I can read energy way better. And so when I'm talking with people and I'm conversing with people, I see traits where even though like dating is not on, I'm not interested in dating these people aren't interested in dating me, but I'll see people's behaviors where I'm like, ooh, relationship with that would be difficult. Ooh, this is a trait that I know. And I'm not talking about like intimate relationship, like even friendship, like being close to certain people. I'll see things where I'll be like, I would never allow that in my life. I couldn't. And I think that we need to be more focused on keeping the toxics out when we're making relationships with people, whether it be boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, significant others, family members, bosses, friends. I think ultimately we really fill a lot of our space with, just humoring toxic relationships, and they're depleting us so vigorously that we don't even have energy to put into positive relationships. So then we just kind of get to this place where we're like, if all relationships are like this, I don't even want to be a part of it. So I think that, when it comes to relationships, we need to be more firm in seeking energy and seeking overall like humanistic behaviors that we're watching versus like these glamorized filtered versions of what we think relationships should be based off of other relationships we've seen or posts that we've seen online. I think that some of the most toxic things that people do is they base their relationships off of things that they see other people doing, or they see the media portray, or you'll have those posts going around where, for instance, you'll have the girl makes the post where I came home and there was this new dress on the bed and shoes and jewelry and makeup, and he said get dressed and we're going out. And it's like, it creates this idea that if you're not doing that, if your husband or boyfriend or significant other isn't doing that exact thing, well, then they're not as good as this person. Should I be with this person? Why isn't this person doing, instead of just saying, communicating or being open with that person or saying, these are the things that I need, without vulnerability in being open with what you need, you can't expect people to know to give it to you. And I think that if we're more open with ourselves in what we need, we can then communicate it to reciprocating parties that this is what we need. And if those reciprocating parties can't fulfill that, depending on what that position of that person holds, it's like, if you can't fulfill that, okay, but you also don't get to take from me. You know what I mean? So I think we just need to be more honest with what we want, with what we need, and finding people who fulfill that, and not wasting our time with people who don't, but also not harboring bad feelings with people who don't. Does that make sense? I don't know. That's my shtick. That's all I'm saying about this, because it's been 17 minutes, and that's my relationship advice thus far. There's a lot I could get into. There's a lot of things about relationships, but I can't say it all in one episode. So chew on that for a while.